The galaxy had known peace for so long that most civilizations believed it was as permanent as the stars themselves. For more than 1,000,000 years, the Galactic Council had governed thousands of intelligent species from its colossal capital, a city world known as Asterion Prime. Suspended around a brilliant blue star, the planet was covered from pole to pole by gleaming towers, orbital elevators, and endless gardens that floated between skyscrapers. Here, ancient races debated laws that affected every inhabited system in the Milky Way. Wars had become rare, piracy was swiftly crushed, and trade flowed across carefully maintained hyperlanes that connected nearly every civilized corner of the galaxy. To countless worlds, the Council was not merely a government, it was the very foundation of civilization itself. Humanity had entered this grand alliance only 72 years earlier. Compared to species that measured their histories in millions of years, humans were little more than children. Yet those children had accomplished something remarkable. In barely 3 centuries of interstellar exploration, they had spread across dozens of star systems, developed original technologies instead of merely copying alien designs, and built a reputation for solving problems that older civilizations had long accepted as impossible. Human engineers repaired failing fusion stars. Human diplomats negotiated peace between rival colonies. Human scientists questioned ideas that everyone else assumed were absolute truths. To many, humanity represented the future. To others, it represented an unpredictable danger. Commander Elias Mercer stood quietly before the panoramic window of the human embassy overlooking Asterion Prime. Thousands of spacecraft drifted through the sky like schools of glowing fish, each belonging to a different civilization. Beside him stood Dr. Amara Chen, humanity's chief scientific advisor, carefully reviewing the agenda on her holographic tablet. "I don't like this," Amara said, breaking the silence. "The Council doesn't summon an emergency session unless something is seriously wrong." Elias kept his eyes on the city below. "Neither do I. But speculation won't help us." Amara sighed. 3 delegations have refused to meet with us this week. The Varithi cancelled every scientific exchange. The Solari have frozen trade negotiations. Something is happening behind closed doors. Elias nodded slowly. "Then today we'll finally learn what it is." The doors behind them slid open, and Admiral Sofia Volkov entered in her formal Navy uniform. Unlike Elias, whose calm demeanor often reassured nervous diplomats, Sofia carried herself like someone who expected danger around every corner. "Our escort has arrived," she said. "The council chamber is already filling." Elias turned toward her. "Any word from Ambassador Karin?" Sofia hesitated before answering. "Only one message." "And?" he said. She paused uneasily. "Trust no one once the voting begins." For the first time that morning, Elias felt genuine concern. Karin had served as humanity's closest ally since their arrival in the council. The elderly ambassador belonged to the Lithari, a species famous for avoiding political exaggeration. If Karin had sent such a warning, then whatever awaited them inside the council chamber was far worse than simple diplomatic disagreement. The Grand Assembly Hall dwarfed every structure humanity had ever built. Concentric rings of floating platforms surrounded a vast circular chamber capable of seating representatives from over 4,000 civilizations. Above them, a transparent dome revealed the endless stars beyond, reminding every delegate that the decisions made within these walls reached across an entire galaxy. As Elias stepped onto the human platform, he noticed something unusual. Conversation stopped. Hundreds of alien eyes turned toward the human delegation before quickly looking away again. The silence was not one of respect. It was the silence reserved for someone already judged. Across the chamber, Ambassador Karin caught Elias's eye. The old Lithari lowered his head ever so slightly, an ancient gesture that among his people expressed sorrow rather than greeting. A deep voice echoed through the chamber. "This emergency session of the Galactic Council will now come to order." At the center platform stood Chancellor Vorish, leader of the council for nearly 2 centuries. His silver scales reflected the chamber's light, and his expression remained impossible to read. Today's proceedings concern the continued membership of the human commonwealth. A ripple spread through the hall. Elias exchanged a quick glance with Amara. "This isn't a policy review," she whispered. "No," Elias replied quietly. "It's a trial." One by one, representatives from the oldest civilizations stepped forward. A towering Charon elder spoke first. Human expansion exceeds every historical precedent. They double their scientific capacity every 23 standard years. Another delegate added, they alter technologies without authorization. A third declared, they establish colonies at a rate impossible for stable governance. Amara leaned toward Elias. They're describing our achievements as crimes. Elias answered softly, no. They're describing what frightens them. Finally, Chancellor Vorish raised one hand for silence. The Council does not deny humanity's accomplishments, he said. Their innovation is extraordinary. Their adaptability is unmatched. Their resilience is unprecedented. His voice grew colder. And that is precisely why we are here. The chamber darkened as an ancient hologram appeared overhead. Entire star systems burned. Massive fleets exchanged planet-shattering fire. Strange warships unlike anything humanity had ever seen drifted through clouds of dying suns. Vorish spoke again. 1,800,000 years ago, another young civilization rose with astonishing speed. Like humanity, they questioned every limitation. Like humanity, they transformed every technology they encountered. Within 5 centuries, they possessed military power surpassing every neighboring empire. The images became even more horrifying. They believed no law applied to them. Entire planets vanished into expanding spheres of white light. The war that followed extinguished over 12,000 inhabited worlds. Silence filled the chamber. Vorish allowed the images to fade before looking directly at the human delegation. We ended that catastrophe at unimaginable cost. Since then, the Council has upheld one principle above all others. He paused. No civilization shall ever again be allowed to grow beyond the galaxy's ability to restrain it. Elias rose to his feet. Chancellor, with respect, humanity has violated no council law. You have not, Vorish admitted. We have invaded no worlds. You have not. We have started no wars. You have not. Then on what legal basis are we standing trial? The Chancellor looked directly into Elias's eyes. You are not on trial for what humanity has done. His next words echoed across the silent chamber. You are being judged for what humanity may one day become. Murmurs swept through every delegation. Elias stared in disbelief. You would condemn billions for a crime that hasn't happened? A representative from the ancient Solari civilization answered before Vorish could. We condemn no one. Then what do you call this? We call it survival. Elias shook his head slowly. Fear is not justice. No, the Solari replied calmly. But history has taught us that ignoring fear can be far more expensive. As the debate continued, Elias realized something devastating. Very few delegates argued with emotion. Most genuinely believed they were protecting the galaxy. Humanity was not hated. Humanity was feared. And fear, he understood, could be far more dangerous than hatred. The voting pillars began rising from the chamber floor, each glowing faintly as representatives prepared to cast their decisions. Elias looked once more toward Ambassador Karin, hoping to find reassurance, but the old diplomat simply closed his eyes in quiet grief. At that moment, before a single vote had been cast, Commander Elias Mercer knew that history was about to change forever. The voting pillars glowed one after another as representatives placed their decisions into the Council's ancient system. Each pillar shone either blue or crimson before dimming again, its choice permanently recorded. No one spoke. The silence inside the Grand Assembly Hall felt heavier than any battle Commander Elias Mercer had ever witnessed. He searched the faces of thousands of delegates, hoping to find uncertainty, but most stared ahead with expressions of grim determination. They did not look victorious. They looked convinced they were preventing another galactic catastrophe. After several long minutes, Chancellor Vorish rose from his seat. A massive holographic display materialized above the chamber, showing 2 columns of numbers that continued to climb until the final vote was counted. At last, the figures froze. The Chancellor lowered his head briefly before addressing the assembly. The vote has concluded. By a supermajority of the Galactic Council, Resolution 7014 has been approved. The hologram shifted again, revealing a single line of glowing text. Humanity is hereby exiled from all Council territories. A collective murmur echoed through the chamber. Elias closed his eyes for only a moment before looking back at the Chancellor. What exactly does exile mean? He asked, his voice calm despite the storm building inside him. Vorish answered without hesitation. The human Commonwealth will surrender all Council facilities within 24 standard months. Every human colony located inside Council territory must evacuate. All trade agreements are terminated. Access to the hyperlane network is permanently revoked. Human vessels will no longer receive military protection, diplomatic immunity, or navigational support. Dr. Amara Chen took a step forward. You're condemning billions of civilians. Entire worlds depend on Council trade. The Council has calculated acceptable survival probabilities, replied another delegate. Amara stared at him in disbelief. You calculated our survival? It was necessary. She shook her head slowly. You reduced living people to statistics. A representative of the ancient Dravian Union spoke next. Dr. Chen, this decision was not made lightly. We estimate that nearly 68% of humanity will survive the relocation. Admiral Sofia Volkov could no longer remain silent. Nearly 1/3 of our population may die, and you describe that as acceptable? The Dravian delegate lowered his gaze. Compared to the alternative, yes. Elias raised a hand, signaling Sofia to remain composed. Losing their temper now would accomplish nothing. If history judges this day, Elias said, it will not remember your calculations. It will remember that the oldest civilizations in the galaxy chose fear over justice. No one answered. The council guards approached the human delegation, not aggressively but with unmistakable finality. The session had ended. Humanity's place among the stars had ended with it. Outside the assembly hall, the endless corridors of Asterion Prime seemed strangely quiet. News of the vote spread through the city faster than light itself. Public displays updated with emergency bulletins. Commercial networks suspended trading with human companies almost instantly. Some alien citizens watched the departing human delegates with sympathy, while others stepped aside as though humanity had suddenly become contagious. Ambassador Karin waited alone near one of the great observation balconies overlooking the capital. Elias approached him. You knew. The elderly Lithari nodded slowly. I knew the vote was coming. I did not know the margin would be so overwhelming. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Karin sighed deeply. Because I spent the last 3 months trying to stop it. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally Karin reached into his ceremonial robes and produced a small crystalline data core. This contains every speech made during the closed negotiations. Elias accepted it carefully. You are giving me classified council records. I am. You could be imprisoned. Karin managed a faint smile. At my age, Commander, imprisonment concerns me far less than regret. Elias looked at his old friend. Why help us? Because, Karin answered quietly, the council has mistaken caution for wisdom. Before Elias could reply, Karin placed a hand on his shoulder. Do not let hatred define what humanity becomes. I don't know if I can promise that. You must. Karin's normally steady voice carried an unfamiliar sadness. If humanity returns seeking revenge, then every fear spoken inside that chamber today will become justified. Elias looked toward the brilliant skyline of Asterion Prime. I don't want revenge. Then what do you want? He answered without taking his eyes off the city. I want them to realize they were wrong. Far above the capital, hundreds of human diplomatic ships began preparing for departure. Throughout council space, encrypted messages reached every human colony simultaneously. Families eating dinner together suddenly learned they had less than 2 years to abandon worlds where generations had lived. Children returning from school found parents silently staring at emergency broadcasts. Mining stations halted production. Universities suspended research. Hospitals began planning evacuations. Across dozens of star systems, disbelief slowly gave way to grief. On Earth's orbital command station, world leaders gathered for an emergency conference unlike any in human history. Presidents, prime ministers, governors, military commanders, and scientific directors appeared around a circular holographic table. The Secretary General broke the silence. Commander Mercer, is there any possibility the Council will reconsider? Elias stood aboard the embassy ship, speaking through a secure transmission. No. What if we appeal? There is no appeal. What if we refuse to leave? Admiral Sophia answered before Elias could. Then every Council fleet becomes our enemy. Silence followed. One of the governors finally asked the question everyone feared. Can we win such a war? Sophia looked toward Elias. He answered honestly. No. No one argued. Humanity possessed capable fleets and modern technology, but the Galactic Council represented thousands of civilizations with military experience accumulated over more than 1 million years. Even if humans fought brilliantly, the numerical difference alone made victory impossible. So, the Secretary General asked quietly, "What do you recommend?" Elias took a slow breath. "We survive." Several officials frowned. "That's all? For now." He activated a star map that expanded across the conference chamber. Nearly every bright line representing the hyperlane network began disappearing one after another. "The Council believes they're trapping us." The map zoomed outward beyond the familiar regions of explored space. But there is something they have forgotten. The display continued expanding until only darkness remained beyond the galaxy's charted frontier. They have never explored what lies beyond their borders. Amara understood immediately. "You want to leave the known galaxy. I want to go where no council law can ever reach us." One minister looked skeptical. "There's nothing out there." Elias shook his head. "No, there is nothing they know about." Over the following weeks, humanity entered the greatest logistical operation in its history. Civilian transport ships were converted into colony vessels. Orbital shipyards worked without pause, constructing enormous arc ships capable of carrying millions of people. Scientists archived humanity's knowledge into quantum libraries. Museums carefully packed priceless artifacts. Farmers preserved seeds from every known crop. Even musicians, artists, historians, and teachers volunteered for the Exodus, determined that humanity's culture would survive alongside its people. Across the galaxy, countless aliens watched the preparations with mixed emotions. Some celebrated the departure of a civilization they believed dangerous. Others quietly donated supplies despite council orders. Anonymous cargo freighters arrived carrying food, medical equipment, and industrial machinery with no identifying markings. Not everyone agreed with the exile, but few possessed the courage to oppose it openly. On the final evening before leaving Asterion Prime, Elias stood alone on the observation deck. Thousands of stars stretched before him, beautiful and indifferent. Behind him, the human embassy was already dark, its archives emptied and its staff preparing to board the evacuation fleet. Amara joined him without speaking for several moments. "Do you think we'll ever see this place again?" she finally asked. Elias watched the lights of the council capital shimmer against the darkness. "Yes," he said quietly. "But when humanity returns." His expression hardened with quiet determination. "We won't return as refugees asking for acceptance. We'll return as a civilization that no one will ever have the power to cast out again." The departure of humanity became the largest civilian migration in recorded galactic history. Every major shipyard in human space worked without pause, constructing enormous arc ships while older cargo freighters, mining vessels, and even luxury liners were converted into colony transports. Orbital docks that once built exploration cruisers now assembled life support modules, hydroponic farms, medical centers, and classrooms. Humanity understood that they were not simply moving people. They were carrying an entire civilization into the unknown. Commander Elias Mercer traveled constantly between Earth's Leadership Council and the growing Exodus fleet. Every day brought another difficult decision. Fuel had to be rationed, colony assignments finalized, and millions of volunteers trained for survival beyond explored space. No one knew what waited beyond the galactic frontier because no one had ever attempted to build a civilization there. Inside Fleet Command, a holographic map displayed thousands of blinking icons representing human worlds. Admiral Sofia Volkov studied the projections with a troubled expression. "We have 93 inhabited colonies," she said. "Only 61 can be evacuated within the Council's deadline." Elias looked up from a report. "And the others? They'll need additional transport." Amara Chen folded her arms. "We don't have enough ships." Sophia nodded grimly. "Not unless we abandon industrial equipment and scientific infrastructure." Elias remained silent for several seconds before answering. "We leave nothing behind that cannot be rebuilt." Sophia frowned. "You'd sacrifice factories?" "I'd sacrifice machines before people." The Admiral sighed. "I already knew that would be your answer." Across human space, difficult sacrifices became routine. Entire factories were dismantled for raw materials. Luxury spacecraft were melted down to strengthen colony vessels. Universities digitized centuries of research into quantum memory crystals that could survive for thousands of years. Even priceless historical monuments were carefully scanned atom by atom so they could one day be reconstructed elsewhere. Not everyone accepted the decision peacefully. On the colony world of New Horizon, Thousands gathered outside the governor's residence carrying banners demanding that humanity resist the council by force. One angry citizen shouted into the public broadcast cameras, "We outnumber dozens of council species. Why should we surrender our homes without a fight?" Another voice joined him, "If we run today, they'll hunt us forever." Governor Elena Brooks stood before the crowd without security guards. "I understand your anger," she began. A man interrupted her. "Do you? My grandparents built this colony with their own hands." "So did mine," Elena replied calmly. The crowd grew quieter. She continued, "I was born here. My children were born here. Believe me when I say no one wants to abandon this world." "Then don't," someone yelled. Elena shook her head. "If we stay, this colony becomes a battlefield." She looked across the crowd. "I will not let our children inherit our pride if it costs them their future." Slowly, one protester lowered his banner. Then another. The anger remained, but many began understanding the painful truth. Sometimes survival required leaving behind everything familiar. Meanwhile, far beyond the public eye, Ambassador Karin continued risking everything to help humanity. Using diplomatic privileges that would soon expire, he quietly arranged meetings with representatives from smaller civilizations who privately opposed the exile. One evening aboard a neutral diplomatic station, Karin met Elias in secret. "I don't have much time," the elderly Lithari said. "You shouldn't even be here," Elias replied. Karin smiled faintly. "I've spent 8 centuries obeying council protocol. Allow an old diplomat one final act of disobedience." He activated a small hologram. Several hidden supply routes appeared. These convoys belonged to independent merchant guilds. Elias studied the map. "They're willing to help us? They won't do so openly." "Why?" "They fear sanctions." Karin sighed. "But many captains believe the council has gone too far." Elias looked at him with genuine gratitude. "You've done more than anyone could ask." "No," Karin answered softly. "I've done less than I should have." Over the following months, mysterious cargo vessels began arriving in human space without official identification. Some carried advanced medical supplies. Others delivered fusion reactors, construction drones, or agricultural equipment. None remained long enough to be questioned. Their captains unloaded the cargo, transmitted a simple message, "Good luck," and departed before council inspectors could investigate. Amara watched one anonymous freighter leave orbit. "They're risking everything." Elias nodded. Even in difficult times, courage rarely disappears completely. Despite the unexpected assistance, the evacuation remained an enormous challenge. Several outer colonies suffered accidents while dismantling orbital infrastructure. A transport carrying nearly 50,000 settlers experienced a reactor failure and had to be evacuated in deep space. Rescue operations delayed the entire convoy for 2 weeks. Standing inside the damaged vessel's command center, Sophia examined the destruction. "We've lost another engine." The chief engineer rubbed grease from his hands. "It can't be repaired." "Can it be replaced?" "Not before departure." Elias entered moments later. "How many passengers?" 48,000. "And nearby transports?" Sophia answered immediately. "Already full." The engineer hesitated before speaking. "There is another option." "What?" "We remove the command deck." Sophia stared at him. "The bridge? It contains enough structural alloy and reactor shielding to rebuild the engine housing." She frowned. "Then how do we fly the ship?" The engineer smiled tiredly. "From auxiliary control. It was never designed for long-range navigation." "Neither were we." For several seconds no one spoke. Then Elias smiled for the first time in days. "Do it." Stories like that spread throughout the Exodus fleet. Mechanics who slept beside broken engines. Farmers who volunteered to grow food on unfamiliar worlds. Teachers rewriting entire educational systems for children who would never know their ancestral planets. Humanity was slowly discovering that survival depended not on heroes but on millions of ordinary people refusing to give up. As the final month before departure approached, the Galactic Council dispatched observer fleets to ensure humanity complied with the exile. Massive alien warships entered orbit around major human worlds. They did not fire a single shot, but their presence reminded everyone that resistance would be hopeless. On Earth, millions gathered beneath the night sky to watch unfamiliar council cruisers hanging silently above the atmosphere. A little girl standing beside her father pointed upward. "Are they our enemies?" Her father looked at the distant lights before answering carefully. "I hope not, but they made us leave." "They did. Then why don't we hate them? The man remained quiet for a long moment. Finally he knelt beside his daughter. Hate is easy. She looked at him curiously. Then why not? Because someday you'll grow up. And I want you to help build something better than this. Thousands of kilometers away, Elias happened to watch that interview during a routine news broadcast aboard the flagship Resolute Dawn. When the recording ended, he switched off the screen and looked out across the gathering fleet. Amara entered the observation room carrying another stack of reports. You've been here all night. I know. She noticed his distant expression. What are you thinking about? Elias watched hundreds of colony ships forming orderly lines around Earth. The Council thinks they're sending refugees into empty space. Aren't they? He slowly shook his head. No. What do you see? He smiled quietly. I see explorers. Amara followed his gaze. Countless engines ignited across the fleet like new stars appearing in the darkness. Do you really believe humanity can start over? Elias answered without hesitation. Not start over. He looked beyond the edge of the assembled fleet, toward the uncharted darkness beyond every known map. We're going to start forward. At that very moment, the first wave of nearly 300 colony ships received departure clearance. Their engines burned with brilliant blue light as they slowly accelerated away from the worlds humanity had called home for centuries. Billions watched the broadcast in silence. Some cried openly. Others saluted. Many simply stood together, committing the moment to memory. No cheers echoed across Earth. No speeches celebrated the journey. There was only quiet determination as humanity turned its face toward the vast, unexplored darkness beyond the galactic frontier, carrying little more than hope, hard-earned knowledge, and the unshakable belief that somewhere beyond the edge of the known galaxy, a new future was waiting to be found. The human Exodus fleet crossed the final Council navigation beacon 83 days after departing Earth. Beyond that point, every official star chart simply ended. The familiar lattice of hyperlanes disappeared from navigation displays, replaced by an endless darkness marked only by scattered stars that no civilization had ever bothered to name. For the first time in recorded history, billions of people were traveling through a region where there were no emergency stations, no trade routes, no rescue fleets, and no guarantees that another intelligent species had ever passed before them. A quiet announcement echoed through every human vessel. This is Fleet Command. We have now crossed the galactic frontier. From this moment onward, all navigational decisions are our own. May history remember this day. The transmission ended, leaving only the steady hum of engines carrying humanity deeper into the unknown. On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Commander Elias Mercer studied the forward display. There was nothing dramatic to see. Space looked the same as it always had, cold, silent, and immeasurably vast. Amara Chen stepped beside him. I expected the edge of civilization to look different. Elias smiled faintly. Civilization has edges. He gestured toward the stars ahead. The universe doesn't. The first few months passed quietly, almost peacefully. Survey ships spread ahead of the main fleet, mapping nearby systems while engineers carefully monitored fuel reserves. Children attended makeshift schools aboard the Orc ships, adapting to life inside enormous rotating habitats. Farmers tended hydroponic forests illuminated by artificial sunlight. Musicians performed concerts broadcast simultaneously across hundreds of vessels, reminding everyone that humanity remained more than a collection of refugees. Then reality began asserting itself. 3 months after crossing the frontier, long-range scanners detected an immense cloud of interstellar debris stretching across nearly 2 light-years. Countless fragments of rock and frozen metal drifted through the region at extraordinary speeds, making safe navigation almost impossible. Sophia studied the tactical display. We'll lose weeks going around it. Chief Navigator Luis Ortega shook his head. We don't have enough fuel for that. So we go through. Luis hesitated. The probability of collisions is significant. Elias looked around the bridge. Suggestions? Silence followed. Finally Amara spoke. We divide the fleet. Sophia frowned immediately. Absolutely not. Hear me out. Amara enlarged the debris field. The cloud isn't equally dense everywhere. Small survey ships can locate safer passages. Luis slowly nodded. Then the colony ships follow the mapped corridors. It'll still be dangerous, Sophia warned. Elias looked at the display one last time. Dangerous is no longer something we avoid. He straightened. It's something we manage. The crossing lasted 11 exhausting days. Thousands of pilots navigated through shifting rivers of debris while engineers constantly adjusted shields and engines. Several cargo vessels suffered heavy damage. One transport lost its communications array after being struck by a fragment no larger than a fist. Another ship spun out of formation when its maneuvering thrusters failed. Every successful rescue reminded the fleet that beyond the Council's borders, there would be no one else to save them. Late on the 9th day, alarms suddenly echoed through Fleet Command. Collision warning. The voice came from operations. Transport New Dawn has lost propulsion. Sophia was already issuing orders. Dispatch rescue tugs immediately. A junior officer interrupted. They won't reach her in time. The main viewscreen showed dozens of massive ice fragments drifting directly toward the disabled transport. Elias spoke calmly. Open a channel. A worried captain appeared on the screen. Our engines are gone. Behind him, crew members rushed desperately between flickering control panels. We're evacuating passengers. How long? 30 minutes. Luis quietly whispered to Elias. They have 15. Without hesitation, Elias turned toward Sophia. Take the Resolute Dawn in. Several officers stared at him. The flagship? Sophia asked. If necessary. She didn't argue. Within seconds, the largest warship in the fleet accelerated toward the crippled transport. Every unnecessary system was shut down to maximize engine output. The gap closed rapidly. Distance? Elias asked. 4 kilometers. 3, 2. Sophia looked toward her helmsman. Hold steady. The helmsman swallowed nervously. One mistake and we'll both be destroyed. Sophia answered without looking away from the display. Then don't make one. The Resolute Dawn finally matched velocity with the drifting transport. Emergency docking clamps extended outward. Contact. A violent shudder ran through both ships. Cheers erupted across the bridge. Using its own engines, the flagship slowly pulled the disabled vessel away from the approaching debris. Moments later, several enormous ice fragments passed harmlessly through the space where the transport had drifted only seconds earlier. Back aboard the rescued ship, its captain contacted Fleet Command. You saved 32,000 people. Elias smiled. No. He looked across the bridge toward his crew. We saved each other. The incident strengthened morale, but it also exposed an uncomfortable truth. Even routine obstacles beyond known space could threaten the survival of millions. Humanity could not rely on luck forever. Several weeks later, another challenge emerged. Fleet scientists began noticing subtle irregularities in navigational sensors. At first they suspected equipment failures, but identical distortions appeared aboard hundreds of vessels simultaneously. Amara examined the readings. This isn't interference. What is it? Elias asked. She enlarged the data. I think space itself is behaving differently. Luis looked confused. Different how? The gravitational currents beyond the frontier don't match any models developed inside the galaxy. Sophia folded her arms. Meaning? Our navigation algorithms were built using Council star maps. And they assume certain gravitational relationships that simply don't exist out here. The room became quiet. Elias finally asked the obvious question. So every navigation computer we own is becoming less accurate every day. That revelation forced another enormous undertaking. Hundreds of scientists, mathematicians, and navigators worked together to rewrite humanity's entire stellar navigation system while traveling through unexplored space. It was slow, frustrating work. Several proposed models failed completely before a stable solution emerged. Watching the teams work around the clock, Elias remarked to Amara, "The Council gave us technology." She nodded. They did, but they also taught us to depend on their maps. Amara smiled thoughtfully. Maybe exile is forcing us to think for ourselves. Months stretched into nearly a year. Supplies slowly diminished despite careful rationing. Every birth aboard the fleet brought celebration, while every funeral reminded people how fragile their future remained. Yet something unexpected also began happening. The further humanity traveled from known space, the more unfamiliar wonders they discovered. One survey vessel reported a planet whose crystal mountains sang as stellar winds passed through them. Another found an enormous nebula glowing with natural electromagnetic storms that painted nearby space in shifting shades of emerald and violet. None of these discoveries could solve humanity's immediate problems, but they reminded everyone that the unknown contained beauty as well as danger. Then, almost a full year after leaving Council space, The exploration ship Pathfinder transmitted an urgent priority signal. The message reached Fleet Command within minutes. Captain Nia Hassan appeared on the screen, barely able to contain her excitement. "Commander." Elias immediately noticed her expression. "What did you find?" She activated a holographic projection. At first glance, it appeared to be an ordinary star. Then the image magnified. Perfect geometric structures surrounded the distant sun. Concentric rings. Gigantic platforms. Objects so immense they dwarfed entire planets. Amara stepped closer in disbelief. "That's impossible." Captain Hassan slowly shook her head. "No." She looked directly at Elias. "It's ancient." "How ancient?" "We're still analyzing the data." She hesitated before continuing. "But based on preliminary decay estimates." The bridge fell silent. "Those structures have been abandoned for billions of years." No one spoke. Billions of years meant the civilization that built them had existed long before even the oldest races of the Galactic Council. Humanity had left known space expecting only hardship and survival. Instead, on the edge of an unexplored galaxy, they had just discovered evidence that an unimaginably ancient civilization had once flourished there. As the entire Exodus fleet altered course toward the mysterious star, Elias quietly realized that humanity's exile might not have led them to the end of civilization after all. It might have led them to its forgotten beginning. The Pathfinder reached the mysterious star system 3 days before the main Exodus fleet. Rather than entering orbit immediately, Captain Nia Hassan ordered every sensor to maximum range. The structures surrounding the ancient star were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Massive rings circled the sun at different distances, each thousands of kilometers wide and perfectly aligned despite showing clear signs of unimaginable age. Between them floated countless smaller platforms, towers, and geometric formations that seemed too deliberate to be natural yet too enormous to have been built by any civilization humanity knew. Captain Hassan stood on the bridge, unable to take her eyes off the display. "Status report." A young science officer swallowed before answering. "No energy emissions. Any signs of active defenses?" "None." "Life signs?" The officer hesitated. "None that we can detect." Another technician looked up from his console. "Captain, the level of structural decay is extraordinary." "Meaning?" He enlarged part of one of the gigantic rings. "These fractures alone should have caused the entire structure to collapse hundreds of millions of years ago." "But it hasn't." "No." "Why?" The scientist slowly shook his head. "We honestly don't know." Back aboard the Resolute Dawn, Fleet Command watched the incoming reports with growing fascination. Every new image challenged humanity's understanding of engineering. The ancient structures had survived for billions of years despite constant exposure to solar radiation, micrometeorite impacts, and gravitational stress. Amara Chen leaned over the holographic display. "The Council never mentioned anything like this." Sophia folded her arms. "Maybe they never found it." Amara looked at her. "Or maybe they never looked." Elias remained thoughtful. "Either way." He turned toward the communications officer. "Recall every survey vessel." The officer looked surprised. "We're not sending exploration teams?" "Not yet." Sophia smiled faintly. "Cautious?" "Cautious keeps civilizations alive." Over the next 48 hours, the human Exodus fleet gradually entered the system. Thousands of ships spread into carefully organized formations, maintaining a respectful distance from the ancient megastructures. No one wanted humanity's first contact with an unknown civilization, even one long extinct, to begin with an accident. Then something unexpected happened. Without warning, long-range sensors detected an automated beacon drifting between 2 enormous orbital rings. "It just activated," the sensor chief reported. Amara looked confused. "After billions of years? So it appears." The beacon transmitted a repeating sequence of mathematical constants, prime numbers, and geometric patterns. Sophia frowned. "That's not a distress signal." "No," Amara whispered. "It's a greeting." Several officers exchanged uncertain glances. Elias nodded slowly. "Designed to communicate with any intelligent species capable of recognizing mathematics." "Can we answer it?" Amara asked. Elias considered the question carefully. "We can acknowledge receiving it." Within minutes, human scientists assembled a response using the same mathematical language. The transmission included sequences describing hydrogen, carbon, planetary motion, and basic physical constants. It carried no military data and revealed nothing about humanity's capabilities. After the message was sent, everyone waited. Nothing happened. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, nearly an hour later, the ancient beacon emitted a soft pulse before shutting down forever. The bridge remained silent. Luis Ortega finally spoke. Was that all? Amara stared at the darkened beacon. I think its purpose was simply to determine whether anyone intelligent had finally arrived. Sophia tilted her head. And after billions of years, it completed its mission. The realization sent a chill through everyone listening. Someone had built that beacon long before Earth's oceans contained complex life, trusting that one day another civilization would answer. The following morning, Elias approved the first manned expedition. A small shuttle carrying Elias, Amara, Sophia, Captain Hassan, and a team of engineers descended toward one of the smaller orbital stations. Magnetic landing systems no longer functioned, forcing the pilots to perform a manual landing on a vast metallic platform covered by layers of cosmic dust. As the shuttle doors opened, complete silence greeted them. There was no wind, no machinery, only the faint sound of their own footsteps echoing across an alien floor untouched for billions of years. Captain Hassan looked around in awe. I've never seen anything so empty. Amara knelt beside strange metallic markings etched into the surface. Not empty. She brushed away accumulated dust. Abandoned. The expedition advanced cautiously through enormous corridors illuminated only by portable lights. Every wall displayed intricate geometric patterns rather than written language. Some resembled mathematical diagrams. Others looked like representations of stars arranged into unfamiliar constellations. An engineer stopped beside an enormous doorway. There are no control panels. Amara examined the frame. I don't think these doors needed them. What do you mean? She pointed toward a series of crystalline nodes embedded in the wall. They probably responded directly to whoever built this place. Sophia raised an eyebrow. Biometric systems? Possibly. Can we activate them? Amara smiled. Not without becoming a billion-year-old alien. The joke briefly eased the tension. Hours passed as the team carefully documented everything they found. To their surprise, there were no weapons, military installations, or defensive fortifications anywhere inside the station. Instead, every chamber appeared dedicated to research, engineering, or education. Captain Hassan paused inside a circular room filled with shattered crystal pillars. This doesn't look like a command center. Amara studied the remains. No. What then? She carefully lifted one of the fractured crystals. I think. She hesitated. This was a library. Elias looked around the immense chamber. If that's true. He slowly turned in a full circle. How much knowledge have we just lost? Before anyone could answer, one of the engineers called from another room. You need to see this. The team hurried through a narrow passage into an enormous central hall. Suspended above the floor floated a single crystalline sphere nearly 3 meters across. Unlike everything else in the station, it glowed with a faint blue light. Sophia instinctively stepped in front of Elias. Careful. Amara slowly approached the sphere. It's active. After all this time? Elias asked. It appears so. One of the engineers scanned it repeatedly. I'm detecting an internal power source. Can you identify it? No. Can you estimate its age? The engineer looked at his readings twice before answering. I don't think the instruments are malfunctioning. What is it? They indicate the power source has been operating continuously for approximately 3.4 billion years. Nobody spoke. That single number exceeded the age of most complex life in the galaxy. Amara reached out but stopped just short of touching the glowing sphere. What are you? As if responding to her voice, the crystal suddenly brightened. Thin streams of blue light spread across its surface. The air around it shimmered. Sophia immediately drew her sidearm. Everyone back. Instead of attacking, the sphere projected thousands of tiny points of light that slowly arranged themselves into a breathtaking three-dimensional map of the surrounding region of space. Elias stared at the projection. That's not just this star system. Amara's eyes widened as the image continued expanding. It can't be. The map grew larger and larger until it displayed hundreds of neighboring star systems, each connected by intricate lines and symbols. Captain Hassan whispered in disbelief. My God. Amara carefully examined the stellar positions before turning toward Elias with a mixture of astonishment and excitement. This isn't a military map. What is it? She smiled for the first time since humanity's exile. It's an archive. Elias looked from the glowing projection to the silent station surrounding them. They didn't leave behind weapons. No, they left directions. Amara nodded slowly. I think. She looked back at the endless network of highlighted stars. They wanted whoever came after them to continue what they started. The discovery of the stellar archive transformed the mood of the human Exodus fleet overnight. For the first time since the Galactic Council had cast humanity into exile, conversations aboard the colony ships were no longer dominated by ration schedules, fuel consumption, or evacuation logistics. Instead, scientists debated impossible engineering theories, children watched documentaries explaining the ancient station, and engineers volunteered for research teams with an enthusiasm that reminded everyone of humanity's earliest days of space exploration. They had not found a refuge. They had found a mystery worth dedicating their lives to. Commander Elias Mercer ordered strict preservation protocols throughout the system. No equipment was to be removed from the ancient stations until every structure had been documented. No experiments would be performed that might damage technology humanity barely understood. Some officers questioned the decision, arguing that humanity desperately needed new resources, but Elias refused to rush. During the meeting aboard the Resolute Dawn, one logistics officer spoke first. Commander, our food reserves continue to decline. If those stations contain functioning technology, shouldn't we begin salvaging immediately? Before Elias could answer, Amara Chen responded. We don't even know what we're looking at. The officer shrugged. We know it's abandoned. Amara shook her head. Abandoned doesn't mean harmless. Sophia leaned forward. I agree with Amara. The logistics officer looked surprised. You do? I've commanded warships for 30 years. Sophia pointed toward the holographic image of the orbital rings. And I've never seen anyone survive by touching unknown alien technology without understanding it first. A few quiet laughs spread around the room. Elias smiled slightly. Then we have our answer. He looked around the conference table. We proceed with patience. 3 weeks later, patience was rewarded. Teams exploring neighboring sections of the station discovered hundreds of intact crystalline storage chambers hidden behind reinforced bulkheads. Unlike the shattered library they had found earlier, these chambers remained perfectly sealed. The doors, however, would not respond to any human tool or cutting device. Chief Engineer Marcus Hale stood examining one of the entrances with growing frustration. We've tried thermal cutters, plasma drills, molecular disassemblers. And? Elias asked. Marcus sighed. The door doesn't even have a scratch. Amara carefully studied the surrounding wall. Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Marcus looked at her. What do you mean? We've spent days trying to force it open. She walked toward the center of the chamber. What if it isn't locked? Marcus frowned. Then why won't it move? Amara looked back at the glowing crystal sphere they had discovered earlier. Because it might be waiting. Waiting for what? She smiled thoughtfully. The right conversation. Everyone stared at her. Sophia finally broke the silence. I have absolutely no idea what that means. Neither do I, Amara admitted. But whoever built this place seemed to prefer communication over force. She requested that the glowing archive sphere be carefully transported into the chamber. Engineers protested at first, fearing damage, but after repeated scans confirmed it could be moved safely, the operation began. The moment the sphere entered the room, something extraordinary happened. Soft blue lines illuminated across the floor, connecting the sphere to every sealed doorway. A low harmonic tone echoed through the chamber as ancient mechanisms, silent for billions of years, slowly awakened. Marcus whispered, well. He smiled in disbelief. I definitely wasn't opening it correctly. Without any visible motors or gears, the enormous crystalline doors silently separated. Beyond them stretched a vast chamber filled with towering columns of transparent crystal. Each contained swirling patterns of light moving slowly through their interiors like frozen rivers. Amara's voice was barely audible. Data. Marcus looked around. How much? She turned slowly, taking in the seemingly endless hall. I don't think we're looking at one library. What then? I think. She smiled with astonishment. This entire station is a library. Research teams immediately began studying the crystal columns, but another obstacle appeared almost immediately. None of the stored information resembled written language. Instead, every crystal projected shifting mathematical structures, geometric relationships, and dynamic three-dimensional models that changed whenever someone approached. One young linguist threw up his hands in frustration. I've translated 17 alien languages. He pointed helplessly at the nearest crystal. This isn't a language. Amara nodded. I don't think it was ever intended to be. What does that mean? She activated one of the projections. It communicates through universal concepts. Marcus tilted his head. Such as? She pointed toward a rotating model of a star. Gravity. The image changed. Then atomic structures appeared. Chemistry. Another transformation followed. Complex energy flows formed intricate patterns through space. Physics. Elias watched the display carefully. They're not teaching words. No. Amara smiled. They're teaching reality. Over the following months, the station became humanity's greatest university. Scientists, mathematicians, engineers, physicians, astronomers, and historians worked together around the clock. Progress remained painfully slow. Every breakthrough required weeks of debate and repeated testing. Most projections remained completely beyond human understanding. One evening, Marcus rushed into Fleet Command carrying a portable projector. You need to see this. Amara looked up from her notes. What happened? I think we finally understood one lesson. He activated the projector. A miniature star appeared above the table, surrounded by streams of energy moving in carefully balanced patterns. Amara studied it for several seconds. What am I looking at? Marcus could barely contain his excitement. It's not a power generator. No? It's instructions. For what? He enlarged the model. They figured out how to stabilize unstable stars. Silence filled the room. Sophia looked skeptical. You mean prevent a star from exploding? Marcus nodded. Not with weapons. He pointed toward the energy patterns. With engineering. Amara slowly sat down. The council has been abandoning dying systems for thousands of years. Marcus looked at her. These people repaired them. Elias stared at the projection. Can we build this? Marcus immediately shook his head. Not even close. Why not? Because we understand perhaps 2% of what we're seeing. His excitement faded into realism. It could take decades. Elias smiled. Then we'll spend decades learning. That answer spread rapidly through the fleet. Instead of disappointment, it inspired renewed determination. Humanity had spent centuries solving impossible problems one step at a time. Nobody expected miracles anymore. Several months later, survey teams following the Stellar Archives map discovered something equally valuable: a nearby planetary system untouched by intelligent life. It contained 3 habitable worlds, rich asteroid belts, abundant water, and enough raw materials to sustain billions of people. Captain Nia Hassan addressed Fleet Command through a live transmission. We've completed atmospheric analysis. Elias leaned forward. Report. The second planet has breathable air after minor adjustments. The third? Colder. And the fourth? A little warmer. Amara smiled. So all 3 are possible. Captain Hassan nodded. Very possible. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sophia quietly said, after everything. She looked toward Elias. I think we finally found home. Elias stood silently, watching the 3 worlds rotate on the holographic display. They were untouched by war, politics, or ancient rivalries. No council laws governed them. No fleets patrolled their skies. They represented something humanity had not possessed since the day of the exile was announced. A future chosen by themselves. He slowly turned toward the officers gathered around him. We will not rush this. Marcus laughed softly. I'm beginning to notice a pattern. Elias smiled. We'll spend years surveying every continent. Amara nodded approvingly. We'll study every ecosystem. Sophia added, we'll establish defenses only after our civilians are safe. And, Elias continued, we'll preserve these ancient stations exactly as we found them. The room fell quiet again. Humanity had arrived as refugees searching desperately for survival. Instead, they had discovered knowledge beyond imagination in a new corner of the galaxy where they could begin again. Outside the viewports of the Resolute Dawn, 3 untouched worlds circled their star in perfect silence, while the ancient orbital rings continued their endless watch overhead. Somewhere, billions of years in the past, an unknown civilization had left behind not weapons to conquer the future, but wisdom to guide it. And as the first human colony ships slowly altered course toward their new home, no one aboard the Exodus fleet realized that this quiet beginning would one day grow into an empire whose influence would stretch across eternity.